This is CNN Breaking News.
Thank you, Kate, and welcome to Inside Politics. Breaking news, troubling breaking news we're watching unfold as we speak in Spain. Spanish police tell CNN is an apparent terror attack. A van plowing into a crowd of people in central Barcelona. It happened at a popular tourist area, which has since and now been sealed off. Police say several people have been hit, and the police now warning people to stay away from this area until told otherwise. Reuters reporting, based on local Spanish media, that two armed men have entered a nearby restaurant. We're getting details on this just coming into us. Early story unfolding. Let's get what we know right now, the latest from CNN International correspondent Issa Soares in London. Obviously, it's early. Obviously, you get conflicting reports, Issa, but where are we?
Well, we're hearing from a spokesperson now, John, from the Catalan police, basically telling us that this is most likely, these are the words, most likely a terror attack. And what we know thus far, we know that a white van with blue writing ploughed into a group of people in Plaza Catalunya in Barcelona. That leads to Las Ramblas, very popular area in Barcelona. Mounted the sidewalk, ploughing into a group of people. We know there are injuries. We have seen video, we have seen footage of people lying on the ground. We do not know how many injured. We do not know how serious those injuries are. We also know that local authorities there have closed off the area, John. They have closed off the metro. They have also expanded the perimeter around Barcelona. And then we have suddenly been hearing that those men behind who were reportedly driving that van, this left the van, according to one witness, and then went into a restaurant in the area, in the popular Boqueria area of Barcelona. They went into the restaurant. A witness said they heard gunshots and explosion, and there are a dozen people, they said, screaming, and several injuries. We do not know how many more, but this is very worrying for the Spanish people, very worrying because this is the height of summer, very popular time, of course, for tourists to visit Barcelona. Just to put it into perspective for people, it's very close to the Sagrada Familia, the Sacred Family, the beautiful church there, and it is packed with tourists on a summer day. It's a street that's lined with shops, a street that's lined with cafes and restaurants, and we have heard from Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy, who has said in the last few minutes that the most important aspect of this right now is to facilitate and help those who have been injured. But also he made the point, John, try and help the authorities into figuring out who is behind this. The fact that they've expanded the perimeter, and the fact we're now hearing that these men have, reportedly according to the witness, have gone into this restaurant is very worrying. Authorities there taking this extremely seriously.
And Issa, the police saying now most likely, obviously, the police themselves would tell you
Correct.
early in such a situation, be careful. But most likely a terrorist attack. And you're sitting in London. We're watching a scene unfold in Barcelona. Across Europe, this will cause a chill because you have yet another vehicle being used apparently to ram into a crowd of people in a crowded, popular area.
Absolutely, and apologies for looking down. I'm just trying to get the latest and translate the latest from the Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy. He basically saying that he's in contact with all the administrations. The important now is the priorities to tend to the injured in Las Ramblas and really facilitate the work of the security forces. But we've also been hearing from local Spanish television and witnesses inside that restaurant that I was telling you, and basically, we're hearing from 2-3 people who are still inside and they're hiding inside that restaurant. So extremely worrying. For just to recap for those watching, this is a hot summer day, beautiful summer day, as you can see there in Barcelona. We know that a white van with blue writing mounted a pavement in Plaza Catalunya that leads to Las Ramblas, and then really plowed into a group of people, injuring people there. We do not know the number of injuries, but I have seen footage and photos of people lying on the ground. Now, the police have closed off the local metro, the transportation area around that area, but also they've expanded the perimeter, John. They're asking people to stay away from the area, stay away from social media, and stay away from posting any videos or images on Twitter. We've also heard from the security services there. We know 8 ambulances are on the scene. Helicopters are also on the scene, but it is worrying because this van that plowed into this group of people was then abandoned, according to one witness, John, and then these 2 individuals went into a restaurant in Boqueria area of Las Ramblas, very popular, of course, for its restaurants and its bars. And their witness tells us they heard an explosion and people now hiding inside that restaurant. Authorities saying this is most likely, and there's the words, a terror attack, John.
Issa Flores, continue your reporting in London. Stand by. We'll get back to you as soon as you have new information. As Issa notes, authorities asking people to stay away unless you are in that plaza. The Catalunya Regional Civil Protection Agency tweeting out, if you are in Plaza Catalunya in Barcelona, stay where you are until the police tell you can leave. Also, we're getting this in the U.S. consulate there. We are, quote, we are aware of a reported incident in Las Ramblas, Barcelona. Please avoid the area and monitor local police. We have the Twitter handle there for updates. That to Americans. Our CNN terrorism expert, Peter Bergen, I believe, is with us on the phone. And Peter, obviously the police, early indication, they say most likely a terror attack. You heard from Issa Flores there. Local police and witnesses saying 2 armed men, apparently. And again, I want to stress we're very early in this. Often the details change as the story develops. But 2 armed men hiding or taking refuge in a restaurant. And again, a white van described as ramming into a crowd in a popular tourist area. Sadly, that part of it, something quite like it, we have heard too often in the past.
Yeah, John, I make three overall points here. This is the 14th vehicle attack, terrorist attack we've seen in the West since 2014. Most of them have been jihadist terrorist attacks, but obviously we had the Charlottesville attack by a right-wing extremist just in the past week. We also had the attack in London with a car outside a mosque ramming a group of Muslims who were celebrating Ramadan, killing one. So, you know, terrorists learn from other terrorist incidents. It's a bit like school shootings where they're copycats, and this mode of terrorist attack is becoming increasingly frequent. Obviously, it requires absolutely no training to do these kinds of attacks. So that's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make is, you know, if you're to look at what are the cast of potential kind of perpetrators of this attack in Spain, obviously they have a Basque terrorist problem, ETA, which has sort of been largely quiescent for some time. And then they have had a jihadist terrorist problem. But, John, I would also observe that Spain has not had the same level of problem that we've seen in France or Belgium or even countries like Germany or the United Kingdom. I mean, I'm hard-pressed to think of a jihadi terrorist attack since the 2004 attack in Madrid that killed 194 people. But certainly those are the 2 groups that are the most likely in the Spanish context. And the third observation is, you know, the reports of this, the 2 of the perpetrators taking up entering a restaurant. You know, unfortunately, this leads us into the potential armed siege, which can go on for a long time. We've seen this method, many times, most prominently with the Taj hotel attack in India, where jihadist terrorists kind of barricade themselves inside a hotel and killed a number of patrons and kept, basically fought to the death in order to sustain media coverage of the event for as long as possible. So those are the 3 observations I'd make about what we know right now, John.
And stay with me 1 second, Peter, because the point you just made is an important one. Just to anybody watching, the local authorities, if you are in Barcelona and not in that area, they urge you to stay away. If you're in Barcelona and still in that area, they urge you to seek the guidance from the authorities, to not move about in a way on your own. Seek guidance before you do. Peter, just From your experience, as we watch this unfold, you mentioned the possibility now of obviously a large police presence will come to that scene, perhaps a hunt or a manhunt or a siege around a restaurant, if it is true that those two armed men are in there. Take us through what your instincts tell you about what we're about to see unfold.
Well, unfortunately, the people who perpetrated this attack probably went into it knowing that there would be a fight to the death. They've seen these kinds of attacks in the past where people, whether it's the Taj Hotel situation in India from several years back, but that was really the beginning of this idea of, let's go in, let's take hostages, let's fight to the death, let's continue the media coverage for as long as possible. You recall, John, that the Taj siege went on for 3 days, garnered a huge amount of publicity for the Pakistani-based terrorists who carried out the attack. And then we've seen similar incidents in Bangladesh more recently, for instance, when a group of ISIS sort of affiliated terrorists went into a restaurant popular with locals and took hostages, killed hostages, and kept the story going for as long as they could before they were killed by law enforcement. So, early days yet, but if this is a jihadist terrorist attack, which is not impossible, that may well be the modus operandi of the people behind the attack, who essentially go into the mission believing they're going to quote unquote martyr themselves, and are willing to fight to the death to sustain media coverage for as long as possible.
Peter, stay with me. I want to bring bring our viewers some of the new details we are getting. Remember, Barcelona, a thriving city, 1.7 million people. Accounts from witnesses are starting to trickle in. One witness who says is hiding in a shop nearby has heard gunshots. That's according to local media TVE24, that station. Another witness said he saw a van driving at about 80 kilometers per hour. He said there's no doubt, this witness saying, that it is intentional. And again, these are early witness accounts, Peter, but this apparently reports of gunshots, report of someone saying he has no doubt that it is intentional. We started the conversation. We have seen this, sadly. We've seen it in London a couple of times. We've seen it in Paris. We've seen it in Stockholm. We've seen it in Brussels. You're mentioning that it's more rare in the case of Spain. Obviously a thriving Western city. That could be one reason. Is there something unique to Spanish domestic politics that we should also be thinking about?
Well, one thing, John, the flow of foreign fighters, so-called foreign fighters from Europe into Syria and Iraq, the countries with the big numbers were 1,500 from France, 750 from Belgium, which is obviously a relatively small country, 750 from Germany, same kind of number of figures from Britain. Now, Spain has had a relatively small number of, compared to other European countries, of people volunteering to go and fight with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, which is one of the reasons we haven't seen, so much jihadist terrorist activity in Spain. So, that is one factor here. But you can't completely discount the idea that this might be Basque separatists. I think that's less likely, but it's certainly not impossible. Basque separatists have been somewhat quiescent in recent years. And their organization ETA has been largely dismantled by Spanish authorities, but certainly they would also be potential suspects in this case, John.
Peter Bergen, stand with us. We're trying to get some additional reporting as well. For those of you just joining us, I want to recap what we do know so far. Witnesses say they saw a van in this area. You're seeing the pictures right there on the right of your screen. A white van crashed into a crowd of people. This in the main square at the beginning, right at a pedestrian walkway area, Las Ramblas area of Barcelona. Local media saying the situation very tense. One eyewitness telling TVE24 he has heard gunshots. Another witness who said he saw the van driving at around 80 kilometers per hour says, quote, there is no doubt it was intentional. That is an eyewitness account. Obviously, we're waiting for more information from the authorities, from the Spanish authorities. We are told, number one, they are obviously responding to the scene. You see some of that in the pictures you see there. Number two, they are urging people. Remember, Barcelona, a thriving city in its own right, also a very popular tourist attraction this time of year, urging people to stay away, do not go there out of curiosity, and telling people who might still be in the area to be very careful to not move about in any random way and to seek the guidance of the authorities responding to the scene. Our reporters are trying to get more information on this, but Peter Bergen, that it took such a short period of time for the authorities to say very likely a terrorist attack. Peter, stand by for me. We have on the phone an eyewitness, Pablo Morante. Pablo, please, this is John King speaking to you from Washington. Please tell me where you were and exactly what you saw.
I was at the Ramblas inside the bus when the attack happened, and we saw a lot of people running all directions, and the police arrived very quickly. So
Okay, Pablo, we're having trouble with your phone signal, so we're going to try to improve the connection so we can continue the conversation with you. Please work with our producers in the control room. We'll find a way to get that signal to bring you back. As we try to do that, Peter Bergen, again, that the police were so quickly, perhaps based on information they have that we don't, but pretty quickly saying very likely a terrorist attack. You see reports from the scene, 2 armed men entering a restaurant after a van hits a crowd. Vehicles have become a recurring part of these stories, especially in these populated western cities.
Yeah, 14 vehicle attacks since 2014, John, almost 12 of them jihadi terrorist attacks, ISIS-inspired. You know, unfortunately, the death toll can be pretty high. You will recall, of course, the Nice, France attack on Bastille Day, July 14th, that killed 84 people. Recall the Berlin Christmas market attack that killed 12 people. And so, you know, if the perpetrator, as it seems to be the case in this case, has a large enough vehicle, a van, and, you know, accelerates at 80 kilometers an hour into a crowded tourist region, a crowded tourist spot, you're unfortunately going to see quite a number of injuries and even fatalities.
And you can see even from the pictures, if you've been with us the past few minutes, the police presence, we see more vehicles, more officers as this situation unfolds. And in most of these cases, am I right, Peter, when it has been a terrorist attack using a vehicle, in most of these cases it has been a singular attack, one vehicle. So obviously one of the questions the police will be having in the region is there something else? Is this part of something bigger? But in most of these cases, and this is why they're so hard to A, advance detect, and then B, to stop as they play out, you get 2 or 3 people in a vehicle and they ram a crowd.
Right. Quite a number of these have been so-called lone wolf or lone actor attacks. In this case, we seem to have 2 perpetrators. Reminds me a little bit of the attack, John, on London Bridge, where they rammed into people on the bridge and then they went over to an area near London Bridge and tried to attack people in neighboring pubs. And it was a group of you know, more than one person. So you know, terrorists, like school shooters, learn from previous incidents and they study them. And unfortunately, this seems to be a mix of 2 different tactics here: the vehicle attack that kills or maims quite a number of people, and then you know, essentially setting up a barricade siege situation inside a restaurant, and sort of sustaining the media coverage for as long as possible, because they unfortunately will likely take hostages and try and spin this out for as long as possible.
Right, and those are the details we're trying to get. You're listening to the voice of Peter Bergen, our CNN terrorism analyst, and as Peter notes, we are told by authorities we're told by eyewitnesses, 2 men apparently leaving a van after it rammed into a crowd. We're trying to get an extent of the scope of the injuries. We're told there are many. Eyewitnesses say the 2 men have since retreated into a restaurant. The question there is, are they hiding, or as Peter notes, are they trying to take hostages and provoke a standoff? You see from the pictures heavy law enforcement presence on the scene there in central Barcelona. Joining me now on the phone is our CNN Chief National Security Correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Jim, any information you have, number one, about what happened, and B, just about the history in this area when obviously U.S. agencies joining other allied agencies trying to share and get as much information as they can. What do we know?
I've been speaking, John, to European security sources, and of course their initial read is that this is an act of terrorism. It bears all the hallmarks. A couple notes about Barcelona. Barcelona has a militant population there that security authorities are aware of. It is isolated. It is hard to penetrate, as they often are. There are a lot of Pakistani immigrants, Moroccans, the Pakistanis with ties to Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a large, very powerful Pakistani terrorist group that's carried out some horrific attacks in Pakistan.
Jim, I want to jump in. I'm sorry, apologies, Jim. I just want to jump in for 1 second because we're getting some new information. This is from TVE24, state-run television in Spain, now saying at least one person has been killed, 20 injured in what they say is most likely, probably, a terrorist attack. My apologies, Jim Sciutto. Continue.
No problem at all. The other point I would make is when you look at the modus operandi here, this looks very similar to the attack in London a few weeks ago, right? Remember the attack on Borough Market started with a ramming attack, and then those men went through the market there bars with knives and attacked more. It appears these men may have guns, or maybe the gunshots are coming from authorities. Regardless, again, it fits that kind of pattern. But this is a community there that authorities have been aware of, a militant community, difficult for them to get tabs on, as they often are. You think of those communities in Brussels that we've reported on before, in Molenbeek, small, hard to get inside, and therefore hard to get vision on what plans these kinds of groups, these kind of actors have coming up.
And Jim, to that point, when counterterrorism agencies around the world have these conversations and they try to learn the lessons of Paris, the lessons of several attacks in London, now we're watching this scene unfold, and again, our early information will change, obviously, over the course of the hours and days ahead. Have there been any, in these conversations, any new conversations about how, this is so hard, as I was discussing with Peter Bergen, 2 or 3 people, you don't need a lot of planning. You get into a van, you go to a popular tourist site, as we have here in central Barcelona. What is the conversation among counterterrorism and security officials about what, if anything, and I think if anything is the hard part, they can do to try to stop these?
Well, one point is this. Particularly after the Paris attacks in November of 2015, there had been a lot of criticism about the lack of sufficient intel sharing among the European intelligence agencies, and even some questionable sharing inside countries, that the police weren't talking to the intel services, etc. Since then, and I've heard this from U.S. intelligence officials, but also Europeans, their sharing has been a lot better. They've been doing a better job of that. But remember, when we've covered acts of terrorism in France and elsewhere, they have a lot of jihadi suspects to follow, too many for them to follow everyone. And that's why so often when you have these attacks, you have folks who were actually on the police radar, and yet they were able to carry out these attacks because it's just not physically possible to follow everyone.
Right. An important point you make, Jim. Stand by 1 second. I just want to update our viewers. Authorities say they're still looking for the driver. You're seeing these pictures here, split screen. We're getting from affiliates in Barcelona, Spain. You see police cordoning off the area, other police officers walking about, police vehicles as well. That presence has dramatically increased in the last 20-plus minutes as they respond to this scene. Again, from eyewitnesses and from the local police, a white van said to crash into a crowd of people. TVE, state-run TV in Spain, reporting 1 dead, at least 20 injured in this attack in central Barcelona. Jim Sciutto, you were talking about the criticism about information sharing, intelligence sharing between and among the European intelligence agencies. That reminded me there was a big dust-up after the recent London attack where even the Prime Minister of Great Britain criticized the United States because U.S. intelligence or law enforcement agencies leaked some photos, and there was some tension there. As we speak today, that obviously involved the U.S. and the U.K., not the United States and Spain. But is there any indication that there's any barriers, any frustration, any tensions, or has that been resolved between the United States and its partners in Europe?
Well, the and I hear this from both sides, on the U.S. side and the European side, the transatlantic cooperation has been very strong, even predating Paris. There's been a lot of information going back and forth to U.S. close allies over there, and the U.S., frankly, has resources they just don't have in terms of surveillance, etc., not to mention military presence in the battlefield where a lot of these plots are ginned up, right, Syria, etc. So, yes, there was that dust-up following about the U.S. releasing more information than the Brits wanted. But in terms of counter-terror cooperation, intelligence sharing, I don't hear criticism across the Atlantic, right? It seems that those channels are open and wide, and the cooperation is very strong.
Jim, stand by. I just want to keep our viewers posted on what we're seeing. What you're seeing there on two screens, the rising police presence in central Barcelona, the Las Ramblas area of Barcelona, if you're familiar with it. Obviously a thriving city, a big tourist attraction. Eyewitnesses and local authorities saying a white van crashed into a crowd of people. TVE in Spain now reporting 1 dead, at least 20 injured. Eyewitnesses saying they believe that it was deliberate, the driving into the ramming of the crowd there, and another eyewitness saying 2 armed men have run into a local restaurant at that scene. What we're trying to ascertain now from local authorities, and obviously they're responding to the crime scene. They are not being as quick with information. They may not have a lot of this information about where are those 2 men, have they been located, what is the police presence in the area, has there been any contact or communication. Authorities do say they are still looking for the driver of that van, and as you watch these pictures, obvious guidance, I guess, but worth repeating. The Spanish authorities saying if you're in Barcelona, stay away from this area, and if you are in the actual square where this happened, be careful, do not move about randomly, and communicate with the local authorities who are there. Again, at least 1 person dead, 20 injured after a van plowed into a crowd of people in Barcelona, and the authorities saying this is most likely, probably, a terrorist attack. Jim Sciutto, as we continue the conversation, you have been through too many of these in different parts of the world. What is happening in these counterterrorism centers, in these law enforcement centers, starting in Barcelona, but obviously around Spain and then around Europe and the United States, where people try to get information and try to help?
Here's a challenge, is that the radicalization process has quickened. I've been hearing this for months, that it used to be that it would take months or perhaps years to cultivate a terror recruit. And now the word is that it can happen in a matter of weeks, that someone watching enough videos online, going to Islamist chat rooms, etc., can go from invisible, not known to be a threat, to carrying out an attack. And that makes it, when that timeline is shorter, it makes it difficult, sometimes impossible, to interrupt it, because it could be someone who came out of nowhere. You had no idea they were a threat. That is a real concern. The other point I would make, John, just in light of the last few days in our country, 5 days apart, you've had a white nationalist and what appears to be terrorists in the UK use a vehicle to kill someone, right? And just as a matter of parallels, you hear the same thing about how white nationalists, and keep in mind that violent extremism in the U.S. is often just as much from that category as from the Islamist category. They are also being radicalized online and often very quickly. So you have, I mean, the parallels are remarkable.
Hi, Jim Sciutto, stand by, continue your reporting. I just want to update our viewers on what we're seeing here. Authorities now saying more than 1 have died in this attack in central Barcelona, Spain, that they are attributing as a probable terrorist attack. More than 1. We don't have a more definite number. Apologies, but that's what happens early on in these situations. More than 1, we are now told, it's being reported by state TV, have been killed in this attack in central Barcelona. A van ramming in to a crowd of people. 20 or more have been injured. Again, eyewitnesses say they believe it was intentional, a white van ramming into a crowd. Authorities are saying they believe this to be most likely a terrorist attack. Eyewitnesses also saying 2 gunmen took refuge in a local restaurant. The question now is, are they hiding? Is there a hostage situation? Is there a standoff? We're trying to get more information on that as the situation develops. You see the heavy law enforcement presence on the scene there. We're going to take a very quick break, continue our reporting, but much more on this breaking news story straight out of Barcelona, Spain, when we return in just a moment.